The door closed with a dry crack that echoed through the freezing dawn. There were no screams. No tears shed in her name. Only the cutting silence of a sentence already carried out. Amina stood still on the deserted street, the makeshift suitcase heavy in her trembling hand, her belly already subtly rounded beneath the thin coat that barely shielded her from the cold that seeped into her bones. She looked back one last time at the house where she had grown up, where she had learned to pray, where she had believed family love was unconditional. The windows remained dark, curtains drawn like eyelids refusing to witness. Her father did not appear. Her mother turned her face away. Her brothers treated her like a ghost in the final week. Family honor, they said, was worth more than a daughter. And in that moment Amina understood a brutal truth. To those people, she was already dead. The man who had promised to stay, who had whispered vows of love while touching her in secret, vanished the very night she revealed the pregnancy. Without explanations. Without remorse. Like a thief fleeing with what he stole, leaving only emptiness and shame behind. Samir heard the news on an ordinary morning while drinking tea in his uncle's small shop. The words arrived disguised as gossip, spoken in hushed tones by women who pretended compassion but whose eyes shone with a sick hunger for scandal. The Al-Rashid daughter, did you hear? Pregnant. Unmarried. The man ran away. The family threw her out in the dead of night. Samir felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. It wasn't just any woman. It was her. Amina. The girl with frightened eyes he used to protect on the way to school when they were children. The young woman who had grown up before him, becoming someone who occupied his thoughts far more than she should have, yet he had never dared approach her beyond the boundaries of respect. He had loved her in silence for years, guarding that feeling like a sacred secret, knowing that men like him did not deserve women like her. And now she was alone, abandoned, carrying another man's child. The entire community judged her, pointed fingers, whispered in mosque. But Samir saw no shame when he thought of her. He saw only pain, injustice, and a loneliness that made him clench his fists. That night, he did not sleep. He stayed awake until dawn, wrestling with himself, with reason, with fear of what people would say. But when the sun rose, his decision was made. He would not run. Not like the others. Not like that man. Finding Amina was not difficult. She was in a small rented room at the back of a house on the outskirts, a place where people with no choices sought refuge. When Samir knocked and she opened the door, the shock in her eyes was as intense as the shame she tried to hide by lowering her gaze. "I came to talk to you," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Amina wanted to close the door, but something in his posture stopped her. Maybe it was the seriousness. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in weeks, someone looked her in the eyes without contempt. He stepped inside, and the words that followed sounded impossible, almost delusional. "I want to marry you. I will raise this child as my own. You will not be alone." The silence that followed was deafening. Amina stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "Do you know what you're saying? Do you know what they'll say about you? Your mother will never accept this. Your entire family will turn their backs on you. You'll lose everything." Samir stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "I've already decided. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm offering you a choice. Accept my help or keep facing this alone. But know this, if you accept, I will not abandon you. Ever." Amina felt the tears burn, but she did not let them fall. Part of her wanted to refuse, not wanting to drag anyone else into the abyss she'd been thrown into. But another part, exhausted, desperate, alone, clung to that offer like a castaway clings to wreckage in the ocean. And so, with fear and hope intertwined, she accepted. The news of the wedding exploded like dynamite in the community. Within hours, everyone knew. The respectable, hard-working man from a traditional family marrying that woman. Reactions were immediate and brutal. Samir's friends showed up at his door to dissuade him, accusing him of madness, of dishonoring his family, of ruining his future. Distant relatives sent furious messages. In the mosque, eyes followed him with a mix of pity and disdain. But nothing compared to his mother's reaction. When Samir told her, she fell silent for long seconds that felt like hours. Then the storm began. "Have you lost your mind? That woman disgraced her own family. She's pregnant by another man. And you want to bring her into my house." The shouts echoed off the walls. Samir's mother was a woman of rigid principles, shaped by decades of tradition, and to her, this was unacceptable. Samir tried to explain, but she refused to listen. "You'll regret this. She'll use you, she'll ruin everything we built. And I swear, Samir, if you do this, I won't make things easy for her. I won't." The threat hung in the air, heavy and real. But Samir did not back down. He looked his mother in the eyes and said, with a calm that surprised them both, "She will be my wife. And this child will have my last name. If you can't accept that, I understand. But I won't change my mind." The wedding took place in a simple, nearly empty ceremony. Few attended. And when Amina entered that house for the first time as Samir's wife, she felt her mother-in-law's icy gaze cut teeth. Rough her like a blade. The first months were a silent war, fought through looks, barbed comments, and humiliations disguised as constructive criticism. Her mother-in-law never missed a chance to attack. The food Amina cooked was never good enough. Too much salt. Not enough seasoning. My mother taught me better. The clothes she wore were inappropriate. A decent wife dresses more modestly. Even the way she prayed was questioned. "Are you sure you're doing it right? Because it doesn't look like you learned properly." Every word was calculated to wound, to remind Amina of her place, of her shame. At night, Amina lay beside Samir and cried in silence, biting the pillow to avoid making a sound. She thought of running away, of disappearing before she completely destroyed the life of the man who had saved her. But every morning, something stopped her from leaving. It was the way Samir defended her. Not with shouting or violence, but with unshakable firmness. When his mother attacked, he stood up. "She is my wife. Respect her." When she tried to humiliate Amina in public, he intervened. "If you can't speak kindly, don't speak." And in each of those moments, Amina felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just gratitude. It was deeper. It was admiration. It was respect. And slowly, without her realizing it, it was love. A different love from the one that had deceived her before. A love built on actions, not proprietary words. Her mother-in-law realized direct attacks weren't working. Samir remained firm, and Amina, though shaken, did not flee. So she changed tactics. She began working behind the scenes, spreading rumors through the community. "That woman has bewitched my son. He hasn't been the same since she entered our house." She sought religious leaders, asking for advice on how to free her son from a marriage she claimed was cursed. She subtly suggested to Samir that Amina be sent back before the baby was born, as if she were defective merchandise that could simply be returned. The pressure was constant and increasingly cruel. One afternoon, while Amina was resting, her mother-in-law entered the room and spoke with an icy calm that froze her blood. "You know that child will never really be his. You know you're destroying his future. A woman who truly cared would leave." The words struck like knives, each syllable piercing deeper. But before Amina could respond, Samir appeared in the doorway. He had heard everything. The disappointment on his face was so profound that even his mother recoiled. "Enough," he said, and there was finality in his tone. "If you continue, you will be the one who has to leave this house, not her." The silence that followed was absolute. His mother left the room without a word, but her eyes promised it was far from over. That night, Samir held Amina and whispered, "You are not alone. You never will be." And for the first time, she believed it. Amina's belly grew, impossible to hide. Her mother-in-law, who until then hadn't known the details, began doing the math. The dates didn't add up. One morning at breakfast, she attacked. That child, when exactly was it conceived? The tone was accusatory, her narrowed eyes fixed on Amina. Samir tried to intervene, but she was beyond control. No. I want to hear it from her. You were already pregnant when you married my son, weren't you? Amina's silence was confirmation enough. The explosion was devastating. Screams, accusations, curses. You brought a prostitute into my house. A woman pregnant by another man. What shame! What dishonor! She lunged forward, but Samir physically stepped between them, arms spread like a shield. I knew. I always knew. This was my decision. And this child will be my responsibility. If you have a problem, it's with me, not her. The words thundered out, and for the first time in her life, his mother saw a man who would not back down. Amina, trembling, held her belly protectively. Tears streamed down her face, but something in her posture was different. She was no longer bent under shame. She stood beside Samir, facing the storm. His mother stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. She did not return for 3 days. And in those 3 days, Amina and Samir breathed, talked, planned. Something between them solidified, irreversibly. Labor began on a stormy night. The contractions were intense, and Amina was terrified, not only of the physical pain, but of what would come after. What if something went wrong? What if the baby was born and Samir changed his mind? What if the reality of raising another man's child became too much? Samir did not leave her side for a single second. He held her hand, wiped her sweat, whispered encouragement as she screamed in pain. You are strong. You can do this. I'm here. The hours dragged on in an eternity of pain and hope. And then, finally, the cry. Sharp. Strong. Alive. The doctor placed the baby in Amina's arms, and she looked at that wrinkled little face with a mix of love and terror. Then she looked at Samir. He stood beside the bed, eyes fixed on the baby, and for one dreadful moment, Amina could not read his expression. Then he reached out, hands trembling. May I? She handed him the child, her heart in her throat. Samir held the baby with infinite care, and when he looked at that tiny face, tears began to fall. Welcome, my son, he whispered, his voice breaking. I am your father, and I will love you every day of my life. In that moment, something was born in that room beyond biology. A true father. A love without blood, but with soul. And Amina knew, with absolute certainty, that she had made the right choice. Her mother-in-law entered the room a few hours later, prepared to reject, to hate, to confirm every suspicion about that illegitimate child. But what she saw stopped her at the threshold. Her son sat in a chair beside the bed, the baby asleep in his arms. He hummed softly, a song she herself used to sing to him when he was a child. Tears streamed down his face, but there was a peace there she hadn't seen in months. And Amina, exhausted, watched with such pure gratitude that it was impossible to ignore. Her mother-in-law approached slowly, eyes fixed on the baby. So small, so fragile, so innocent. When the baby opened his eyes and looked straight at her, something cracked in her chest. It wasn't an instant change. There was no divine epiphany or dramatic apology. But something shifted. She reached out hesitantly and touched the baby's cheek. Soft, warm, alive. What will you name him? She asked, her voice rough. Samir looked at her, surprised. Amir. Prince. She nodded slowly and, for the first time since Amina entered that house, spoke to her without hostility. He'll need warm blankets. I'll get the ones I used with Samir. She left the room, leaving stunned silence behind. Amina looked at Samir, eyes wide. He smiled, exhausted but hopeful. Maybe, he whispered, maybe there's hope for all of us. Chapter 9, Rebuilding on Ruins. The following weeks brought slow but steady transformation. Her mother-in-law did not suddenly become sweet and welcoming. The wounds were too deep, the pride too ingrained. But the attacks lessened. Icy stares gave way to neutrality. And then, gradually, to something that almost looked like acceptance. One morning, Amina woke